Welcome to part 4 of my vampire race guide. In this section we'll be going over the overall pros and cons of the vampire race as a whole. Disclaimer, this guide is based on my personal experience and opinions and is by no means the definitive way to play the vampires. If you have a different strategy and want to add something to mine, please leave a comment down below. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the video. Let's begin with the pros and cons of the vampires in the campaign. Firstly, they have a fantastic starting location with lots of options of where to expand from either Castle Drakenhof or Svartshaven. They can go to the north or the south and will find plenty of lands to invade without too much heavy resistance. They also start at war with a very weak faction who are easy to take out in a small number of turns. This allows your starting lord to level up quite quickly and be given access to more and more powerful spells in the early game. Once Templehof have been taken out of Eschen, they also are given access to a mission very close to them which has various rewards that put you forward in both the campaign and battle. The mission requires you to complete a battle that can be easily won with just a starting army alone, so it makes for an excellent start in your campaign. Your capital is incredibly tough to take down as each size upgrade gives a settlement huge additions to the garrison. This means you can leave it with no defensive army and not have to worry unless several fully stacked armies come to invade. The vampire starting location is also fairly central in the map, so when the chaos event occurs, you have a lot of time before you need to worry about their armies attacking you. This makes it easier for you to attack factions in the late game in the north, as they will be focusing on defending armies from the chaos, meaning southern settlements are easy pickings for late game armies. The Raise Dead ability also makes it incredibly fast and easy to get depleted armies back up to higher numbers if used in the right location. An army can go from having 2 or 3 units on low health to having a full army of elite troops in the space of a single turn. Not only is this faster than global recruitment, it is also cheaper, as units are not being sent across your vast empire to reinforce your lords. Corruption can be seen as a good or a bad thing. It's good because spreading it to adjacent provinces can wreak havoc with public order for non-vampires, and make expansion into new territories a breeze. On the other hand, it still takes time to spread corruption, and when you get to the late game and can steamroll factions and take a province in the span of a few turns, you then have to spend time and money to increase the corruption as quickly as possible or face a rebellion. At best this can slow you down, and at worst can completely ruin your invasion plans if a large rebel army spawns and begins attacking newly taken lands. Diplomacy is a big area where the vampires struggle, as any non-vampire faction will have a huge disliking to you by default, because of the aversion penalty. This means you cannot make much money from trade and will have to go to war with factions if you become blocked by them. This can then cause you to be at war with so many factions at once that you get overwhelmed and wiped out, which obviously is not a good thing. Most vampire factions you meet will be your ally without much action on your part, so it can be quite easy to confederate several of the other factions and gain huge chunks of land through nothing more than power of friendship. The von Carsteins or vampire counts, depending on who you choose to play as, will be a great target for alliances, as confederating them will grant you an easy access to the rest of the map, and of course the unique building chain in Castle Drakenhof for the von Carsteins. You do lose the global recruitment ability in favour of Raising the Dead, and while given the perfect circumstance and location it is a vastly more powerful ability, if you want a new army, it will have to be made in provinces that have the recruitment buildings, and they could be on the opposite side of the map to your battle lines. This means it could take a huge number of turns before a fresh army gets to the front lines to support armies in need. Unit cost for the vampires is also slightly more expensive than other races for units of the same class. For example, Empire Spearmen cost 300 to buy and 75 per turn in upkeep, whereas Skeleton Spearmen cost 375 to buy and then 94 per turn in upkeep. This is likely due to the fact that vampire units can cause fear, but it's still worth noting that armies of similar calibre will cost more for vampires when compared to other factions. Now for the pros and cons of the vampires in battle. The army as a whole has strong infantry, cavalry and monsters, and almost every unit unlocked after early game can be viable into the end game if used correctly. With Fellbats you can get early game air superiority before other factions can do anything to counter you. This means you can render entire enemy ranged and cavalry units useless, and give your main lines plenty of time to get into the battle at full health. All lords in the roster have access to powerful spells that can buff their own troops and cause havoc among the enemies. This means you don't have to wait until you can recruit a wizard to have magical damage on the battlefield, and are already ahead in the early game because of this. All units cause fear to nearby enemies, so when in combat, hostile troops will lose their morale to higher rates than they normally would, even if they are winning a fight. This means that even an incredibly weak army can cause units to rout through fear alone and achieve victory against heavy odds. This will also give you an edge in a fair fight, as if you have the exact same tier units as theirs, they will begin to lose morale and retreat from the fight. There are several different ways that vampire armies can regenerate, from spells to unit auras and even some items. It allows your armies to stay in combat for an impressive amount of time, even if they are heavily outmatched. You can also save a lot of time replenishing casualties if you use these abilities at the end of a battle to bring back any lost units. The crumble system is kind of in the middle. It's good in the sense that your units will never retreat from a fight, but it also means that once your leadership falls, it's not long before the unit will be wiped out completely and will not return to battle, whereas any units that rout will likely return to the fight, and usually with around a third of their health remaining. Speaking of leadership, the stats for it in the vampire army are very poor. There are very few units that have leadership stats even over 50. This combined with the crumble system means units need to win the combat they're in, or be supported by lord and heroes with healing spells to keep them in the fight. Beyond leadership, the armies are generally very reliant on their lords to do a lot of damage with spells as well as melee. If a lord should fall in battle, there is very little chance that the army will survive for much longer, even if they have the overall advantage due to the leadership penalty. Vampire armies also lack any ranged units, so must get enemies into melee to cause any damage, which when combined with a lack of leadership can make combat extremely difficult. In sieges, it is especially hard to defend, as once the towers on the walls are lost, there is nothing more they can do but wait for the army outside to break in. They also lack any real defense against large units, with only the Spearmen and the Terrorgeist having anti-large damage bonuses. This leaves them weak to races that employ monstrous units such as the Beastmen or Lizardmen. The final downside is that they only have one strategy in battle. Since there is no way to attack at range, vampires are forced to rush the enemy and lock them in melee as fast as possible. This makes them very predictable to play against and can take some of the fun out of playing them, as you just have to do the same thing every time. That concludes this race guide on the vampires. If you want to check out the other parts, there's a link in the card and in the description for the playlist to the series. Don't forget to vote on the poll for the next race you want to make a guide for, which is linked in the description. If you enjoyed this video at any point, please consider leaving it a like, as it really does help out a lot. And if you want to see more videos of this type, maybe click that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with what I'm doing. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.